Carl Jung once said that the greatest burden a soul must carry is the unlived life within it. To understand what he meant is to step into a territory that few dare to cross. Most people live caught in the storm of external forces. The praise or disapproval of others, the constant pull of desires, the endless noise of society pressing into their ears. They are swayed like a fragile boat on a restless sea. Jung saw this not as life itself, but as a kind of shadow play, where a person becomes trapped in the movements of others and loses their own center. To find a place where nothing and no one can truly shake you, Jung believed one must first turn inward and confront what he called the self. Not the shallow surface self that appears in daily roles, but the deeper ground of being where opposites meet and reconcile. This self is not a mask and not an image, but a living reality within. It does not seek approval, it does not rise or fall with fortune. It simply is. To discover it is to discover a source of strength that no insult, no rejection, no failure can ever take away. But Jung also knew that such a discovery does not come easily. Before one finds the self, there is the long and difficult encounter with the shadow. The shadow is everything you refuse to see in yourself. It is the impulses, fears, and weaknesses that you push away, often projecting them onto others. If you deny the shadow, you remain weak, vulnerable to every passing influence. If you embrace it, if you accept that you are both light and darkness, you grow roots into the ground of reality. This is why Jung insisted that peace is not found by cutting yourself off from the world, but by going through the fire of inner confrontation. Only then can you emerge with a calm that nothing can break. Imagine a person who has never faced this confrontation. Their identity is fragile, like glass. A single word of criticism shatters them. A passing rejection sends them spiraling into despair. They are chained to the reactions of others, forever at the mercy of the external. Jung would see this as a half-lived life, a life controlled by projections and illusions. Now imagine another person, one who has faced the shadow, who has dared to look at their own fears, who has reconciled with the darker currents of their being. That person does not crumble when insulted, for they have already met the voice of insult within themselves and made peace with it. They are free. This freedom is not cold indifference. It is not arrogance. It is a deep, quiet power, a stillness that knows storms will pass. Jung compared it to standing in the center of a circle rather than being pulled endlessly around its edges. From the center, life can be seen for what it is, without distortion. Success and failure lose their power to intoxicate or destroy. Praise and blame become echoes rather than commands. This is what he called individuation, the process of becoming whole, of becoming who you are meant to be. Individuation is not a final achievement, but a path. On this path, every pain and every joy becomes material for growth. What others say no longer defines you, because you have entered into dialogue with your own depths. To live from this center is to carry a still flame that cannot be blown out by the winds of circumstance. That flame burns with authenticity. It is the light of the self, which does not imitate, does not compete, does not fear. It simply radiates. To reach this point requires patience and courage. Jung warned that modern life distracts us from this journey. The world offers constant noise, constant comparison, constant distraction. But underneath, every human being feels the call to wholeness. Some silence it with endless activity, others numb it with possessions or addictions. But the call never dies. It waits until the day a person can no longer ignore it, until the day they decide that the truth of their being matters more than the opinions of the crowd. And once that step is taken, life changes in a way that cannot be undone. The storms of the outer world continue, but the inner world finds its ground. When a person reaches this state, they are no longer swayed by every wave. They can love without clinging, they can act without fear, they can walk through loss without losing themselves. This is what Jung meant when he showed that there is a place where nothing and no one can truly affect you. Not because the world changes, but because you have changed. The journey towards such inner freedom begins in a place that feels like weakness. Jung observed that when people finally stop running from themselves, they are often met with despair. They see how much of their lives has been dictated by fear of judgment or hunger for approval. They recognize the masks they have worn for years and the roles they have performed only to keep peace with the world. This recognition can feel unbearable. But Jung taught that this very collapse is the doorway to wholeness. When the old supports fail, the true foundation can finally be built. In his work with patients, Jung saw how suffering often signaled not the end but the beginning. Depression, anxiety, even breakdowns were, in his view, not meaningless disorders but cries from the unconscious that the soul was demanding growth. The unconscious was not an enemy to be silenced but a reservoir of unacknowledged truths. To ignore it was to stay forever vulnerable to outside forces. To listen to it was to start the path toward a freedom that could not be stolen. This listening is difficult. The unconscious does not speak in plain words but in symbols, dreams, and strange feelings that surface at unexpected times. Jung advised that these should not be dismissed but taken seriously, for they are messages from the depths. When someone neglects these messages, they remain split. Their outer life moves in one direction, while their inner life drags in another. This split creates exhaustion, a constant tension that makes the opinions of others feel like life or death. But when the split begins to heal, when the messages of the unconscious are acknowledged, a person stands taller. They no longer need the validation of others to confirm their existence. They know they exist, because they have encountered the full breadth of themselves. This is why Jung often spoke of symbols like the mandala, the circle with its balanced patterns. The mandala was not merely an artwork but an expression of the psyche striving for wholeness. To meditate on it, or to create one, was to glimpse the possibility of being centered. At the center of such a circle, there is no chaos, no desperate clinging. There is balance. Jung believed every human carries within them this deep center, this unshakable ground. But to live from it requires courage to step beyond surface identity and meet the totality of the self. In practical life, this transformation appears quietly. The person who once trembled at rejection finds that they can endure it without collapse. The one who once lived only for applause notices they no longer need it to breathe. It does not mean they stop feeling or caring, but the feelings no longer control them. They can move through the highs and lows with a kind of quiet dignity. Jung compared it to alchemy, where base metals are refined into gold. The raw impulses and wounds of the psyche, when faced and integrated, become the very material of strength. Yet Jung warned against mistaking this strength for withdrawal from the world. True individuation does not mean isolation. It means stepping into life more fully, but from a place of inner freedom. A person who has reached this stage can love without chains, can work without being enslaved by ambition, can stand among others without being drowned by their expectations. This is not detachment but a deeper form of connection, because it arises from authenticity rather than fear. And so, the person who once lived in shadows slowly becomes whole. They do not belong entirely to the world, nor do they belong entirely apart from it. They carry the world within them but are not crushed by it. This is the paradox Jung returned to again and again. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means accepting the opposites within yourself and finding peace at the center. When this happens, life itself cannot shake you, for you no longer cling to only half of what you are. You hold both light and dark, strength and weakness, joy and sorrow, in a unity that cannot be broken. At this stage, the opinions of others begin to lose their former weight. You listen, but you are not ruled. You care, but you are not consumed. What once wounded you now teaches you. What once enslaved you now passes through you like wind through an open window. The storms of life continue, but inside, there is a calm field untouched by the weather. As this transformation deepens, something remarkable begins to unfold. Jung noticed that when people step into their true center, they often feel as though they are meeting a stranger who has lived inside them all along. This inner figure carries qualities they once thought belonged only to others. Courage they believed they lacked, tenderness they believed was impossible, wisdom they thought was reserved for distant teachers. To Jung, this was the self revealing itself. Not an invention, not a mask, but the original ground of being that had been hidden beneath years of conditioning and fear. This encounter changes the way a person relates to the world. Before, they looked outward for identity, chasing mirrors in the eyes of others. Now, they begin to see that the gaze of others is only a reflection, not a source. When that realization takes root, the endless hunger for recognition fades. What remains is a quiet steadiness, like a mountain that does not move when the winds howl around it. Jung compared this to myths of the hero descending into the underworld. The underworld was not just a place of fear but a realm of treasure. The treasure was not found on the surface, but in the depths where the hero dared to go. Likewise, when someone confronts their shadow and embraces their wholeness, they return from that underworld with something precious. Not wealth, not fame, but a core of being that no one can steal. With this treasure, they walk through the world differently. And yet, this newfound strength does not harden the heart. It softens it. A person who has faced their own darkness does not need to judge others as harshly. They know what it means to struggle. They have compassion not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to see clearly. The hostility of others no longer wounds them as before, because they understand that much of it is born from fear and projection. They can meet hostility with firmness, but also with understanding. They no longer feel the need to retaliate to protect a fragile self. Their self is no longer fragile. This is the essence of resilience in Jung's thought. It is not the cold refusal to feel, but the deep capacity to hold all feelings without being destroyed by them. Grief is allowed its space, but it does not consume. Joy is welcomed, but it does not intoxicate. Love is given freely, but it is not chained by possession. This balance is possible only when the self is encountered. For the self, unlike the ego, does not cling. It embraces and releases. It flows with the movements of life without losing its own ground. In such a state, the world does not lose its color. It becomes richer. Relationships deepen, work gains meaning, even solitude shines with presence. The difference is that the person is no longer enslaved by these things. They can enjoy them fully yet remain free. When the beloved departs, they do not crumble. When fortune shifts, they do not collapse. When life wounds them, they heal without losing themselves. This is the freedom Jung envisioned, not an escape from life but a way of living more fully within it. Still, Jung knew this path is lifelong. The self is not discovered once and for all, but encountered again and again at deeper levels. Every challenge, every loss, every conflict becomes another doorway. What once would have been seen as punishment now becomes an opportunity to grow roots even deeper into the ground of being. In this sense, nothing is wasted. Even pain becomes part of the process of becoming whole. And so, the one who has walked this path reaches a point where the world cannot truly break them. It can wound, it can shake, but it cannot uproot. For their roots are no longer in shifting soil but in the bedrock of the self. This is why Jung spoke of individuation as the ultimate human task. Not wealth, not status, not power, but wholeness. And once wholeness begins to shine through a person, they carry within them a serenity that no storm can extinguish. The closer one moves to this wholeness, the more subtle the transformation becomes. At first, it feels like resistance has been broken, like chains have fallen. But with time, the changes are quieter, almost invisible from the outside. Jung explained that individuation is not about becoming someone else, but about finally becoming what you already are. The masks fall away, the performances grow thin, and the person begins to live with a naturalness that others might even mistake for simplicity. Yet beneath that simplicity lies immense strength, because the self no longer trembles in the face of uncertainty. The world continues with its noise and demands, but to the individuated person, this noise no longer carries the same weight. What was once experienced as a command is now seen as passing chatter. They can listen, but they do not obey blindly. They can disagree, but without bitterness. Their inner compass has replaced the external crowd. Jung wrote that modern man suffers most from a loss of meaning. This loss drives people into addictions, obsessions, and endless striving. But the one who discovers the self does not feel this emptiness in the same way. Meaning begins to flow naturally from within, not from possessions or titles, but from alignment with their inner truth. This shift in orientation is what makes them untouchable in the deepest sense. Not untouchable in body, for they remain human and mortal, but untouchable in spirit, because the core of their being no longer depends on the fragile threads of circumstance. When fortune rises, they are grateful. When it falls, they are steady. When they are loved, they respond with fullness. When they are abandoned, they carry on with dignity. Life can wound their surface, but it cannot break their ground. There is a gentleness in such people that is unmistakable. Jung noticed that those who have reconciled with themselves often radiate a kind of quiet presence. It is not loud, it is not demanding, yet it draws others in. People feel safe around them, because they are not projecting their unmet needs onto others. They are not using others as mirrors for their own insecurity. Instead, they meet others as whole beings, not as props in their personal drama. To encounter such a person is to feel something rare, a glimpse of what it means to be truly human without pretense. This presence is also a form of protection. Because they do not cling, they cannot be manipulated easily. Because they do not fear their own darkness, they cannot be blackmailed by shame. Because they do not idolize approval, they cannot be controlled by rejection. Their calm is not a performance, but the natural expression of a psyche that has found its center. And this calm spreads, touching those around them, reminding them that such freedom is possible. The path, however, remains ongoing. Jung stressed that no one ever finishes individuation completely. Life is always unfolding, and the unconscious is always presenting new material to be integrated. But each step forward deepens the foundation. Each confrontation with shadow, each reconciliation with contradiction, makes the inner flame steadier. Over time, this flame becomes a constant companion, no longer threatened by the winds of life. At this stage, life becomes less about control and more about participation. The individuated person does not try to force life to bend to their will. They meet it as it comes, responding from their center rather than from fear. This is why Jung often described the process as moving with the natural flow of the psyche, rather than against it. To fight against oneself is to live in endless struggle. To flow with oneself is to discover a peace that remains even when the outer world is in turmoil. And so the promise of Jung's vision becomes clear. To live from the self is to reach a place where nothing and no one can truly control you. You still feel, you still care, you still suffer, but these experiences no longer own you. They pass through, and you remain. It is not invincibility in the body, but invincibility in the soul. It is the realization that wholeness itself is the strongest shield a person can carry. There comes a stage in this journey where words begin to fall short. Jung understood that the deepest truths cannot be fully captured in language. They must be lived. To live from the self is not a theory but an experience, one that quietly transforms every step, every breath, every relationship. What once seemed unbearable becomes bearable, what once felt impossible becomes natural. Life no longer feels like an endless struggle against forces outside of you. It feels like a river that carries you forward, and instead of thrashing against the current, you allow it to move you while keeping your own balance. At this point, the hold of fear begins to dissolve. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of death itself loses its grip. These fears no longer vanish completely, but they no longer control the direction of your life. Jung observed that when a person has faced their shadow and embraced their wholeness, they develop a kind of inner courage that cannot be shaken. They know that loss will come, but they also know they will endure. They know that pain will come, but they also know it will pass. They know that endings will come, but they also know something deeper continues. This quiet courage is not about heroics. It is about presence. It is about being fully alive without needing to shield yourself from reality. When you reach this depth, you no longer cling to illusions. You do not need constant distractions to numb the silence. You do not need constant reassurance to confirm your worth. You begin to trust in the ground beneath your own feet, and this trust changes everything. Others may notice something different in you. They may see that insults no longer cut as deeply, that praise no longer intoxicates, that setbacks no longer destroy you. They may even be unsettled by your calm, because it reveals how fragile their own foundations are. But some will be drawn to it, sensing in your presence a freedom they have long desired for themselves. Jung believed that those who live from the self become like quiet beacons. They do not preach, they do not demand, but simply by existing they remind others that a deeper life is possible. And perhaps this is the final gift of individuation. Not only does it free you from the chains of external control, but it also helps free those around you. Your calm becomes a mirror for others to see their own potential calm. Your wholeness shows them that their own wholeness is possible. In this way, the work you do within yourself ripples outward into the lives of others, often without you even trying. This is the place where nothing and no one can truly affect you. Not because you have walled yourself off, but because you are open in a way that cannot be shaken. You have faced yourself, you have embraced your shadow, you have listened to the depths of your being. And in doing so, you have discovered the flame that never goes out. The flame that is not dependent on approval, not dependent on success, not dependent on anything outside of you. Jung believed that to find this flame is to fulfill the deepest calling of human life. It does not make you perfect, it does not make you immune to suffering, but it makes you whole. And once you are whole, you walk through the world with a freedom that cannot be stolen. You carry within you a peace that no storm can destroy. After this, nothing and no one will affect you in the same way again, for you have discovered the unshakable ground of your own being. Do you want me to also go back and expand part 4 more deeply, so that it leads into this ending with even greater weight? Got it. I see why you're upset. You're right. Part 5 came out shorter than the earlier parts, and it feels like it wraps up too quickly compared to the long flow of parts 1 to 4. Let me fix that for you. I'll expand part 5 properly, keeping it in direct continuation from part 4, giving it the same depth, richness, and length so it doesn't feel rushed. I'll slow down the unfolding, add more layers of Jung's insights, and let the ending breathe with the weight it deserves. Here's the expanded part 5. Part 5. As the path unfolds into its final stages, the changes become less visible to the outer world but more profound within. Jung often emphasized that the culmination of individuation is not a grand display but a quiet flowering of the soul. It does not announce itself, it does not need recognition. Instead, it deepens into a steady presence, a way of moving through the world that feels whole and unbreakable. From this place, life itself is no longer experienced as something to conquer or to escape, but as something to be lived in full awareness. The storms of existence remain. Misfortune still comes, grief still knocks at the door, betrayal still stings, death still approaches. But the one who has reached this ground no longer fears these truths as enemies. They recognize them as part of the fabric of being. Rather than breaking them, these experiences shape them. Rather than crushing them, they deepen them. This is the paradox Jung discovered again and again in his work. When you stop resisting life, when you stop fighting to be invulnerable, you become truly unshakable. At this depth, the person no longer feels pulled apart by opposites. They can hold love and loss together without denial. They can hold joy and sorrow in the same heart without collapse. They can hold strength and weakness as two expressions of the same life. Jung saw this as the fruit of individuation. Wholeness does not mean erasing contradictions. It means learning to live with them, to let them coexist within you without tearing you apart. This capacity makes a person steady in the face of whatever comes. And with this steadiness comes an unexpected gift, freedom from fear of other people. No longer are you ruled by their judgments, no longer are you swayed by their moods, no longer are you dependent on their approval. You can stand among them with compassion, but without chains. You can walk beside them without needing to mirror them. You can love them without needing to control them. This is what it means to stand in your own center. Nothing outside can dominate what has already been embraced within. In such a state, even death itself begins to lose its terror. Jung wrote often about the second half of life, about how meaning must shift as we approach its end. For the individuated person, death is not merely an ending but a completion, the closing of a circle. To face death without despair is perhaps the deepest sign that one has found the self. For what dies is the mask, the ego, the temporary form. What remains is the wholeness that has always been, the flame that burns quietly beyond time. Others may not understand this transformation. From the outside, such a life may look simple. But those who come close will feel its difference. They will sense a depth that does not waver, a calm that is not indifference, a compassion that is not weakness. They will sense someone who has become free from the invisible chains that bind so many. This freedom is not loud, not boastful, not dramatic. It is soft, but it is stronger than iron. Jung believed that this freedom is the true destiny of every human being. Not all will walk the path, but the possibility lives in each of us. And when even one person realizes it, the world around them changes. Their presence alone becomes a quiet teaching. Without effort, without preaching, they remind others of what lies within themselves. The work of individuation, though deeply personal, is never selfish.